This review is tragically overdue, and for that, I apologize, dear viewers out there, because you guys out there, some of you guys out there anyway, voted for me to read and review this book, and I definitely did, and I really enjoyed it. So for that, I'm going to say thank you, but I hope you guys stick around for the entirety of the review so I can express why I like this book so much, especially for those of you out there who have not read this book, because I'd never heard of this book. I'd never heard of this author. I do read thriller from time to time, but I would say it's probably not one of my priorities when it comes to genre. It's just that most thrillers I've read don't have the kind of depth you will find in this novel, The Devil of Nanking by Hayder. But before we get into the review, what is the hook? What is The Devil of Nanking about? A young woman named Gray travels to Tokyo in search of alleged video footage of the 1937 Nanking massacre, shot by a survivor. That man, now a professor at a local university, will have nothing to do with her. Gray stays in Tokyo hoping to convince him over time, taking up a job at a nightclub as a companion to pay the bills, which introduces her to the Tokyo underbelly and a group of gangsters led by a strange and mysterious man with a dark past. All right, I'm going to have to apologize one more time because this book is so good in its construction. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I'm apologizing for the fact that I may repeat myself often, because you have character, you have plot. They do this in this book, and I argue that is exactly what every book should be doing. You should not be able to take the protagonist out of the story and have it be the same, have it feel the same, have it have the same resonance. And that's exactly what you have here. So let's start with characterization. We will start with a protagonist, a young woman who calls herself Gray. She is from England, and she is obsessed with the Nanking massacre of 1937. And she also believes that there is actual video footage of this event. And she believes that it is in the possession of a man who lives in Tokyo right now, who is a professor. He is also a survivor of this massacre, at least she believes so, and so she goes there to try to get it. But what makes her characterization so great in this book is the fact that she is kind of an unreliable narrator. I mean, it's implied because it's written in first person. Her section, well, I guess all of the sections are written in first person. You don't expect this kind of character depth in thriller novels, at least I don't. Now, granted, this has been compared to The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, which I can see the similarities, but it's not exactly the same. And granted, I haven't read the book, I've seen the movie, but let's just say the layers of characterization in that story are deep as well. So, about Gray, we learn relatively quickly that she's been institutionalized numerous times for stuff that you do learn about in the book, but I'm not going to spoil it for you here. And she just drops these knowledge bombs on us periodically. And you go, wait a second, you were in an institution, why? She doesn't give it to us yet. So not only are we following along with her motivation, her personal motivation to go to Japan to find this footage and the man, the survivor, but also in the back of our minds, we know that she has this trauma she's dealing with. What happened to her? Why was she put into an institution? Why does it matter? And don't worry, it definitely matters. It is not just backstory, but what it creates a protagonist that is damaged goods, let's say. It's someone who you can get behind very easily. She's a very personable young lady, a very determined young lady, very much like Clarice in Silence of the Lambs. But then throughout the book, she gives us these bits of information to reveal who she truly is. And not only is that interesting from our standpoint as a reader to understand what makes her tick, it's also informing how she is approaching her own role in the story and the interactions therein. The only things I expected going into this book was that it was going to be a thriller, and there appeared to be some historical elements to it. What I did not expect was a psychological deconstruction of this young woman, which not only happens, but makes the plot so much better. You might even call this a literary thriller. The next character I'm going to briefly talk about is the man, the professor she is going to Tokyo to see because he shares half this novel. His name is Shi Chong-ming, and he's a bit of a brick wall for her because she shows up, he denies everything. She's looking for this videotape. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Get the hell out of my office. But we learn very quickly that he is indeed a survivor, because maybe 40% of this novel, if not 50% of the novel, is told in his perspective, what he went through before and during this Nanking massacre. And we very deeply get an understanding of why he was hesitant to even bring this up to the surface, because it's a very painful memory, which parallels Gray's character and her backstory, as well as the plot. Remember what I said, a symbiotic relationship, so damn well that I clearly can't stop talking about it. All right, I'll briefly stop there on characterization, but there will be more because, like I said, it's all intertwined. So the plot, this is another thing that caught me off guard, because I guess I just expected a story of this young woman running all over Tokyo, kind of, you know, somewhat of an adventure story, I guess, but that's not at all what happens. It takes place in such a small area. So what she does, Gray goes there, she talks to the professor. The professor says, nope, sorry, but she's broke. So she is clearly not very responsible. She left England with barely any money. Now she has nowhere to stay, but she is determined. So what does she do? She gets a job at a nightclub as a companion. She meets this strange young man named Jason, and he introduces her to this nightclub, as well as allows her to stay in this place he's at for very cheap rent. There's a couple of other women there from Russia who are working as companions in the same nightclub, and this is when things get really bizarre. She gets kind of caught up in the whole companion nightclub thing. She turns into a favorite, and wouldn't you know it, some of the people who frequent this place are Yakuza. They're gangsters, and there's a weird old man that appears to be nearly dying, who has some kind of mystery surrounding him. And of course, she has to dig deeper into that mystery. And little does she know, it ties into the entire reason she's there. Remember? Layers, connection, symbiotic relationships. Again, why I love this story so much. And like I said, the other half of the plot is Shi Chongming, who is recounting his tale, his tragic tale from the Nanking massacre to the present, more or less. Another great thing about this novel is its chapter construction. So it is a thriller, so I'm sure you guys can expect a harrowing ride, something that you aren't going to get bored of quickly. And indeed, another thing she does is flip-flopping the POVs. So we'll have a chapter with Gray's POV, and then the next chapter will be Shi Chongming's POV. And so you're never stuck in one person's head for too long. And of course, there is generally some kind of cliffhanger at the end of the chapter before she changes to a new POV, and then ends with a cliffhanger, rinse and repeat. So overall, I enjoyed the plot. It was much more slower paced than I imagined, but I love the depiction of Tokyo, right? It's not like she's running all over the city like you might see in a standard thriller. She doesn't venture far from the location she finds herself in. And it's really a location we don't experience much in Japanese novels or films. This is also a gritty book. It doesn't pull any punches. Well, I don't want you to think it's overly gory or overly grotesque or anything like that, but it's not afraid to say what needs to be said. And speaking of which, and here I go going back to characterization again, but Gray's characterization is so great because it's one of those situations where she seems kind of standard, right? She seems like a Clarice Darling, but then you find out she's, man, this is really tough to talk about without spoiling it. But let's just say she's not the most likable character you find out. And that was so much more brilliant, especially, here I go again, with how the plot interweaves with her as a person. Who she is, where she's been, what she's done before even entering the story that we're reading now. So a great depth of characterization. The plot, like I said, it's pretty simple, but it's compelling. It's weird. It's just so weird. There's some really weird ass characters in this book, and I absolutely loved it. I'm a fan of Japanese films that deal with the Yakuza, but this story takes it one step further. All right, let's talk about the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel. It's great. I mean, it's not doing anything amazing, but it's not plain either. It's readable. You don't get tied up in too much description. It also doesn't read like a James Patterson novel where it's clipped sentences in standard thriller fashion, or even someone like Blake Crouch. Mo Hayder is writing this book like she thinks it needs to be written. Yes, it's a thriller. Yes, it has historical elements. Yes, it's a deep character study. So it's really kind of hard to categorize this thing. I know on paper, on Amazon and Goodreads, it's categorized as a thriller, But this is so much more than a standard thriller. You can tell Mo Hayder really cared about the way in which she told the story. She wanted something that is entertaining, but is also deep, and that is a difficult thing to do. I feel like often in fiction, it's rare to have an author merge all of these qualities into a book that is not only enjoyable, because it reads at a good clip, but also has the kind of depth that elevates it into the literary category. See, I told you I would get off track. The writing is great. It's not overly simplistic. It's not overly purple. There is a utility to it, but also it reveals character because, like I said, written in first person POV. So it's capturing the voice of Gray and Shi Chongming. And I believe it's over 400 pages, but it never felt long, which is why I'm going to give The Devil of Nanking by Mo Hayder an 8.5 out of 10. A thriller that is so much more than a thriller, with deep characterization that is expertly interwoven into the plot, which takes you to some very dark and strange places, with writing that does just what it needs to do without becoming overbearing or dense. And all around a great book. There were some things that I had issues with, like sometimes I felt like the Shi Chongming chapters were getting a little long in the tooth, but overall, I really enjoyed this novel. But let me know, have you read The Devil of Nanking by Mo Hayder? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And unfortunately, she is no longer with us. She died far too young, but thankfully she has plenty of other books to enjoy. So I look forward to digging deeper into her bibliography. And thanks out there for recommending this book and voting on this book, because like I said, I don't think I would have discovered it any other way. And thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.